was a Sunday morning, and we just were told we had a game, and we took off in a couple of cars and went across town. We had on jackets, and we pulled our jackets up over our head as we walked into the gym. Didn't realize it till we got in the gymnasium that here we were, and we were going to play a black team.
Some elements of the Klan was prevalent in Durham during that time. And if they had known that,
In the South, the laws on segregation were etched in stone. We thought that's the way it would be forever.
The origins of the secret game of March 1944 are actually somewhat ambiguous. This was an illegal game in the state of North Carolina, and no one knows for sure how it was initiated. But the story goes, students from North Carolina College for Negroes would attend these clandestine meetings at the YMCA in Durham. And there would be students there, white students, of course, from Duke. One of the gentlemen from Duke boasted about their medical team. He said they were the best in the state, if not even beyond the state of North Carolina. Another member of North Carolina College for Negroes says, well, you may be great, but you haven't played the greatest. And that's Coach McClendon's team.
John B. McClendon would become a legend in basketball. At the time of the secret game, he was only 28 years old, but he was already revolutionizing the sport. He implemented an up-tempo style of play that dominated opponents. McClendon's players revered him.
McClendon was my mentor. He gave us the 4 W's. Who are you? What are you? Why are you here on this earth? And where are you going?
John wanted very much for his young people that he was working with to feel as good about themselves as they possibly could. There was a psychological impact, of course, of all this segregation. And you tended not to think of yourselves as quite equal. Even though you might profess to be, there was still that inside. He wanted his players to think that they were as good as any white player, and they should have the same opportunities.
I met Coach McClendon in 1940. And when I arrived there, they called us to a meeting in the gymnasium. And they told us, don't go downtown, period. We knew the results of going to the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time.
Into this atmosphere of rabid segregation, virulent segregation, McClendon played this secret game.
Kept secret by all but those who were there pretty much for 50 years.
Sunday morning at 11 o'clock, the game was scheduled when most of the people in Durham would be in church.
Coach McClendon ordered all of the students out of the gym. So if anything were to happen, they wouldn't get hurt.
Players from both teams were very, very nervous.
Some of his players had never had any contact with whites before. Some of them had never touched a white person, to shake hands even.
It was an official game. They had 2 referees. There was a time clock, but there were no spectators. The first moments of the game, there were missed shots, turnovers. I think they just had to get the bugs out, and they obviously did.
You could feel it coming. They had never, ever seen anybody run up and down the court like we did.
Literally, they ran Duke's team out of the gym.
Those fellas just beat the heck out of us.
They just crushed them. They crushed them.
They beat the Duke team 88-44. Remember, this was an illegal game, and Coach McClendon was a young man. There is no doubt that he risked his professional life, and maybe even beyond that.
History will never tell what they really did. It was just a ripple on the pond. But the fact is, the ripple came, and then pretty soon was the tidal wave.
Elgin Vale of Los Angeles Lakers. Oscar Robertson drives away from three. Hits again with a skyhook. Julius Erving. Stephen Huff. 5 seconds to go. Jordan with seconds to go. Puts it up. At the buzzer. Michael Jordan. Kobe Bryant is hitting Sony at the buzzer. LeBron James with a huge. I don't believe it. Wait, how did he do that? How did he do that? Linebacker force.
They had 15 children. I'm the 15th, which was good because it made life a lot easier. I didn't have to pick as much cotton as the rest of it. During the cotton picking season, the white kids went to school, but the black, you didn't go to school at all.
I was one of 14 kids that my grandmother raised, and we didn't have a lot of money. I was in the cotton fields from 8 years old on up.
My father was killed when I was 4 months old. My mother died in childbirth. I was reared by my grandmother.
My father was educated to the 1st grade, went to work in the packing houses. My mother went as far as the 8th grade. They married and proceeded to have 13 children. 8 of them reached maturity.
We had an outhouse, and finally, by the time I get to 8th grade, we had an indoor facility. That was a big moment. That was a great moment. You know, you didn't have a lot, but that's just kind of where life was.
We laughed, we loved, we had fun and stuff, and that's basically all you really do. All you really do is your surroundings. I lived in a black world.
From kindergarten to college graduation, I never had a white classmate.
I lived right behind this white high school, and of course never could go to it. And so us colored kids watched through some bushes. In effect, what we were watching was the mainstream, white America. It was everybody else, and then there was us.
I spent more time on the basketball court than any day. I would have these dreams that I was playing against the greatest players, and I would actually lose myself in those dream games.
As the senior prom ensued, and everybody was coming to the senior prom, I was the only one that wasn't there. I was on the court by myself.
I would just play all day long. I would play till it got so dark sometimes. I could even see the ball. I could only hear it. Hit the goal.
They laughed and went into the senior prom and had a good time. And probably about 11 or 12 when they came out, I was still there.
In the 11th grade, I decided that I was going to get wealthy, and I wasn't going to get wealthy going to school every day. So I quit and I started digging septic tanks. Got a little bit on the job, 5 minutes. That's where I started thinking of college.
my grandmother's support, I knew that if I was going to rise above that, I had to find a way to win a scholarship to college. I had to go to college.
Well, historically black colleges were created because blacks weren't allowed to attend historically white colleges. So if a black person wanted to pursue a higher education, one had no choice.
Education has always been the fundamental desire on the part of African Americans. But during the period of slavery, in some areas, learning to read and write was banned.
These were people who had been treated like animals, listed along with animals in the federal census.
The Reconstruction effort in the South after the Civil War included the creation of higher educational institutions for black people. By the turn of the century, 75 historically black colleges had been established. Many black people saw education as their salvation. This effort was led both privately by churches and publicly by state legislatures. The two most influential black thinkers of the day were W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. Washington, an ex-slave, started Tuskegee Institute in Alabama in 1881.
A state infested with Klansmen. Enough racial hatred to fill up a whole nation. And somehow he talks them into giving them some land to build a school for black kids. But he did it.
Booker Washington asked me to come to Tuskegee and see what he was doing. I'm proud to come to Tuskegee because I'm proud of what Tuskegee has done, of the fine spirit of human service that your graduates carry with them throughout their lives.
For decades to come, historically black colleges provided not only education, but something else just as important: refuge from a largely racist world.
The black college undertook you and nurtured you and gave you those things that would allow you to move through mainstream America. The black basketball players, they will in most cases say that that experience, that nurturing through the black college was so important, not only to them, but also to their family tree.
The university was performing the role of a mother.
They're nurturers, man. That's why you call them her. See, fathers don't nurture.
My first few months at Fisk, there was always somebody pushing me.
One of the great things that was up on our wall was, as you climb, you should lift.
I had tutors whether I wanted them or not. In fact, at a time I was trying to hide from tutors. At Fisk, you had to be neat at all times. You had to dress nice and have a shirt and tie on, and I didn't have any of that.
I only had one pair of pants, and I would wash the pants and walk around in my underwear, hoping the pants would dry the next day. Sometimes go to class with wet pants.
But there were people who supplied that and made sure that I looked like a college student.
Black school felt that you had to be a good student. One guy, I remember about a week before we were going to graduate, he walks up to the desk of the secretary and says, "Are the dean in?" She said, "What did you say?" He said, "Are the dean in?" She went and got the dean and says, "This is the dean. Would you mind telling the dean what it is you asked?" He says, "I don't know what you're making a big fuss out of this. I came to see the dean. I just asked, are the dean in? The dean said, the dean are in, and your ass gonna stay in.
In black schools, Howard University, Hampton, Fisk, I don't refer to the head man as president. I call him the gatekeeper. The word president is just, it's become a bad word anyway. Idi Amin was a president. Bush is a president. So anybody be a president. Tuskegee's had 4 gatekeepers since Booker T. Washington. 4. That's stability.
And my 4 years of West Virginia State, man, was like, it's like magical, man. It was a home away from home. It was a definite friendly port and storm. And it was what they call now, it was a safe house. At graduation, everybody's crying, sobbing, man, boo-hooing. And I said, they don't want to leave, man. They don't want to leave this place.
Because sports turned out to be one of the early conduits through which African Americans could integrate a field within the larger American society, they very quickly took on an enormous importance within the community.
At first, baseball and football were the dominant sports at historically black colleges. Basketball, after its invention in 1891 by Dr. James Naismith, began to build a fan base. In 1906, the first African-American basketball league was created by Dr. E.B. Henderson, a Harvard-educated phys ed instructor. Henderson's contributions to basketball were prolific. He developed the public school athletic leagues, giving birth to organized basketball in urban areas.
Grandpa was the driving force behind the initiation of inner-city play between Washington and New York City. Within 2 years' time, he hit such a pace that he had developed 40 teams and trained over 1,000 individuals.
By 1913, 2 conferences for historically black colleges were up and running. The level of play was getting better and better. Crowds were growing, and the games became more than just a sporting event.
There was usually a dinner, a game, and then after the game, a dance, where jazz music and popular music of the day would go on through the night.
Because of the lack of resources, you played in what was called matchboxes. And so the crowd was right there. You'd be in a hot room, you're yelling like crazy, you're pulling for your team. Folk are running up and down the court. Everything is real upbeat, very exciting, from when the whistle blows and the tap to the end of the game. It's just...
Great teams and big rivalries developed within these conferences. Tuskegee and Fisk, Howard and Morehouse, and then the undefeated Morgan State teams of the early 1930s. Games remained segregated, but in an extraordinary event, Virginia Union's dream team ventured above the Mason-Dixon line. They played 2 exhibition games against a squad composed mostly of players from Long Island University, led by legendary coach Claire B. Great coaches who often managed more than 2 or 3 sports at black colleges evolved out of these institutions. Talmadge Hill, Henry Huckles, Mark Caldwell, Henry Keene, and John McClendon.
John McClendon was an unbeatable specimen of a coach. We call him the godfather of black college basketball.
As a coach, you talking about a little innovative man. Listen, he was out of sight.
He played upbeat tempo all the way.
He brought a brand of basketball that was revolutionary at the time.
This motion offense that nobody else was even thinking about doing then. Wherever he played, other coaches would come in and sit at the top of the gym, and they would be feverishly taking notes.
Part Delaware Indian, part African American, McClendon was born in 1915 and raised in Hiawatha, Kansas. He was a superb all-around athlete, a strong gymnast, and an excellent swimmer. But basketball was his love.
He wanted to go to Springfield College, where basketball was invented by Dr. Naismith. But then his father discovered that Dr. Naismith was right there at the University of Kansas.
So he took his son up there, told him to go see Dr. Naismith. John McClendon walked into his office and said, "You're going to be my advisor." Dr. Naismith said, "Who told you that?" And John McClendon said, "My father." Dr. Naismith said, "Fathers are always right." And I think Naismith really saw something exceptional about this young man and saw the passion for the game of basketball.
Naismith told him that the whole nature of basketball was to have activity. And the better you could play, the faster you could play, the more entertaining it was.
Dr. Naismith said it always bothered him when he would pass playgrounds and he would see kids playing in one basket, that he did not mean for the game to be played in one basket. The game should be played from baseline to baseline.
When McClendon left school, he went to North Carolina College, became the head basketball coach, and developed most of his theories on the fast break based on the Naismith philosophy.
At that time, the type of basketball being played all over the country was basically a half-court game. Played slow.
McClendon invented a game that was vigorous, lively, at top speed.
Coach McClendon devised a system where the ball should be shot an average of a shot every 8 seconds.
A fast break from a missed field goal. With fast break from a made field goal.
Now you got it, boy.
When you play these teams, you better be ready. I mean, emotionally and physically, the whole ball of wax, so they're coming at you.
While black college basketball was beginning to thrive, there were few opportunities after college for standout players to continue to play, except for a small number of all-black basketball teams which barnstormed around the country.
Probably the best professional team ever was right here in New York. New York Renaissance Tribe.
The Wrens played more than 3,000 games and won close to 85% of them in a remarkable 27-year history.
They put themselves out of business. They were too good. Nobody wanted to play them. They just ran out of competition.
As the Wrens went out of business in 1949, the National Basketball Association was about to be formed. There were no black players at the NBA's start. However, there was one team they could turn to.
It's the world-famous Harlem Globetrotters.
The only basketball team that embraced black players was the Globetrotters. All the others, they just weren't attainable.
That's the only place for black athletes to go. There was nowhere else to go.
Basketball Wizards Extraordinary. Their patented blend of brilliant play and zany capers has made them the most popular team in the history of the sport.
The Harlem Globetrotters functioned for the sports world like blackface minstrelsy functioned for vaudeville. Globetrotters mimicked this reverse stereotype. You make your enemy laugh, make yourself appealing, and you could seduce them. The Globetrotters masked their own brilliance as athletes with this whole acrobatic, sometimes played in a stereotype strategy. But within the African American community, they weren't seen as clowns. They were seen as extraordinarily gifted and brilliant performers.
At times, the Globetrotters played professional teams and even beat the NBA champion Minneapolis Lakers, led by George Mikan.
I grew up wanting to play for the Globetrotters because the Globetrotters was the biggest thing in basketball. I wanted to be Marcus Haynes.
Marcus Haynes decides it's safe enough for a little fun.
I had already carved out a name for myself. I was going to be Sonny Showboat Hill.
The Harlem Globetrotters, Basketball Wizards Extraordinary.
There was always a trade-off with the Globetrotters. What's that clownishness about? Why not just go and beat their asses on the court in the straight-up fashion?
But the crowd didn't come to see them play it straight.
When I left school, I was as good a basketball player as I knew at that time. But I couldn't just go out and do tricks with the ball. You could say, well, let's do some tricks. I can't do tricks. My trick comes when you try to get the ball off me in a game, but I couldn't do it. And I got just a little bit upset over the fact that, my goodness, here I'm out here. This is my skill going to waste. I should have gone with Syracuse, a legitimate team. I don't want this.
Man, they're out of this world.
My parents and my teachers, they took very special pains to reassure me about my worth as a person. And you appreciate that. But then you go get on the bus, and there's a sign on the bus that for colored in the back.
Throughout the South, at that time, you were treated as if you were something that was much less than a human being.
To go to the movies, you had to go around the back to the alley, to the little booth there, pay the same amount as people paid who walked to the front. Or in the restaurants where they'd let you stand up and buy some food but not sit down.
We used to go in town, but anytime you'd go shopping, if you tried on a hat, you had to put a net on your head if you were black.
If I were walking down the sidewalk and I came upon some whites, I would have two choices. One is to get off the sidewalk, or the second would be to direct my eyes to the floor so that I couldn't make eye-to-eye contact. You could be arrested, you could be harassed, you could put your family at risk, and in some instances you could even be killed.
In the mid-1940s, Winston-Salem State College hired a young coach, Clarence Big House Gaines.
He came here in '45, straight out of college, Morgan State. I met him on a blind date, and when he first appeared in the doorway, I thought he was the biggest thing I'd ever seen. He played football at Morgan. He loved football, but he learned to love basketball more, I think. He was a head football coach for a time at Winston-Salem State. Then he was made the head basketball coach, and he was athletic director at the same time. That was a bit much because he only got one salary for two jobs.
To make matters more difficult, he didn't know much about the game of basketball, but he had a friend nearby who did. John McClendon was only a few hours away at North Carolina College for Negroes.
McClendon went to Big House and told him, come and work out with me and see if you can't learn something more about basketball.
They talked basketball all night long.
A friendship grew out of those times, and Big House would tell you this, that he learned a great deal from John and that he sort of hung on his very words there at the beginning.
John McClendon invited Big House Gaines to go on recruiting trips with him, something unheard of today.
The school didn't have a recruiting budget, so he would call Big House Gaines and he would say, okay, we're going up to New Jersey, or we're going up the way, they would say back down there. We're going up the way, and the way being up north, and they would say, you know, we'll stop in Virginia, we'll stop in Baltimore, we'll stop in Philadelphia.
Coach McClendon taught him, okay, you go up north to get your skill players, as he called them, and you go to the Midwest to get your fundamental players. You want a shooter, you go to Illinois or Indiana. You want ball handlers, you go to New York. You want flashy players, you go to New York playgrounds.
It was understood that when it was on Mr. McClendon's territory, he would not say anything, wouldn't even get out of the car. And when it was on Clarence Edward Gaines' territory, McClendon did the same thing.
So they never competed recruiting, they worked together. Little House and Big House.
I had never heard of Winston-Salem. I had never been south. As I got off the train, it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. Nobody was there. There was steam coming up from the tracks and whatnot. And we looked down and we saw a head way down on the other end of the platform. And the head started to come toward us. And the body got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. We looked up at it. It was Coach Gaines. He was, what, 6'5", or so, 300 pounds. And we looked up at it and said, oh, shucks. He says, as he always says, son, how you doing? And he always called everybody son.
I said, don't call me son. My name is Ernest Brown. And Coach was tough. He told me, son, take your ass up to that dormitory and just sit there and be quiet.
After my first year, I didn't start. I wasn't playing that much. I only played when the team was down. I would come in, I'd shoot. We'd get up, I'd come out the game. After the season, I said, Coach, I'm not going for this anymore. I'm going back to Philly. And he stands up in front of me. All this 6'5", 300 pounds. And I'm saying to myself, I don't want to fight this man. You know, I can't. So I'm chilling. So he said, wait here.
Coach would sit you down and say, son, where you going? Did you talk to your mother?
He comes back, you know, a little while later, he says, your mother and your sister on the phone, you go talk to them. He was a guy who understood how to get to guys. He knew everything about you. And he knew that for me, it was my family, my mother, my sister. I did basically whatever they said. And, you know, they just kind of ran my life. I was a mama boy. So I was there for the next 3 years, and thank goodness I was. Because Big House is a great coach.
Although black college basketball had grown and improved dramatically, the teams were not allowed to participate in the biggest postseason tournaments. The popular NIT, NCAA, and NAIA were for white teams only. No blacks allowed.
John McClendon in 1948 actually started a basketball committee to bring about integration in college basketball. And they petitioned the NCAA to open up their tournaments to the historic black colleges. The NCAA said that the fans may not appreciate the kind of game that your colleges play, and your coaches perhaps are not competent enough. The NCAA said no.
The NCAA never wanted us. Black schools, they never wanted us. Then finally, thanks to John McClendon, who fought hard to get us in, the NAIA accepted us.
But there was a catch. The best teams from the black colleges had to compete against each other in a separate tournament. And only the winner, one black team, was allowed to participate in the NAIA tournament.
When we played those schools, they put up new nets. And in some cases, not all nets would be new, but they would soak them the night before. And sometimes soak them in salt water so that the ball would come out slow. Give them a chance to get back on defense.
When the teams got to Kansas City, they were faced with the cruel realities of the time. Hotels would not give rooms to black players. John McClendon fixed that problem by contacting officials of the Converse Rubber Company, who put pressure on local politicians.
He won that battle. John won that battle to integrate the hotels in Kansas City. He wasn't militant, but he did militant things in his way, in his quiet way.
In 1950, two college rivals, Earl Lloyd and Harold Hunter, would make history. Lloyd, a 6'6" dynamic forward from West Virginia State, and Harold Hunter, a 5'9" guard who went to North Carolina College for Negroes and played for John McClendon.
His nickname was Wild Man, Harold Wild Man Hunter. This guy, without question, was the best conditioned athlete I've ever seen in my whole life. I mean, you play against him, man, you're at the 39-minute mark, and you're on the foul line holding your pants and breathing and your shirt, and he's there going, I said, man, you're not human, man. I said, when you die, they have to give your body to science, man, so they can check you out.
My last 2 years at North Carolina College, the main opposition was West Virginia with Earl Lloyd. They were being looked upon by the sports writers in that area as being the greatest black college team that had ever been assembled.
Sophomore year, we went 33-0.
In 1950, the championship game is between John McClendon's North Carolina team and West Virginia State. Harold Hunter is the star of the North Carolina team.
In the CIAA tournament title game, Harold Hunter's team defeated Lloyd's West Virginia State in the final seconds, 74-70.
Harold Hunter becomes the MVP of the tournament, and Earl Lloyd is the runner-up and VP. At that same time, John McClendon and other black coaches, as well as some people in the black press, from the Pittsburgh Courier, the Baltimore African American, and other newspapers, trying to push the NBA to accept black players. Finally, in 1950, the Washington Capitals decided it was an opportune time to integrate.
I found out from a classmate walking across the campus. A little girl said to me, I heard your name on the radio. I said, now, what have I done wrong this time, She said, some team called the Washington Capitals drafted you to play for them.
The Washington Capitals contacted McClendon, and that's how I was notified. I was offered a contract full $4,000. Earl Lloyd probably had a little bit to negotiate. He's 6'6" and I'm 5'9". What am I going to negotiate for? 5'9", I'm the smallest one in the NBA. What am I going to hold out for? They offered the contract and I signed it. In 1950, I became the first black to sign an NBA contract.
That was something that John always wanted. He always wanted Harold to be the first to sign with the pros. Harold was like a son to John. John felt like he was a father to Harold.
I signed for $5,000. Yeah, $5,000 was a whole bunch of money for somebody that ever worked in their lives. Teachers working 9 months are making $2,500 a year. So here I am, I'm making twice more than teachers and can still get a summer job to augment that. I became the first African American to play in the NBA. Now here I am, guys from Georgetown, UCLA, Ohio State, and you read about these guys. Here we are, I'm from a small black college. I mean, you're so awestruck just from being there. It's hard to practice. And then you realize, man, the common denominator is about to happen. And the great common denominator is, when you scrimmage and they throw the ball up, we are all equal.
I made it with the squad through the exhibition season, and the club told me they had to let me go because they had to try to save the space to get some taller fellas.
I truly believe that if Harold Hunt had been drafted by another team, he'd have played in that league. But the Washington Capitals were not going to have two black players on the same team, not in 1950.
The NBA had an unwritten quota system that prohibited teams from having more than one or two blacks.
I really didn't think I'd been given a fair shake. But, you know, you can't buy anything at the store on hurt feelings. So I just went about trying to do the best I could. And I went to play in a league they called the Eastern League.
The Eastern League took in all guys. It was a league where players who should have been in the NBA found that as a substitute.
There was only 16 places in the United States that you could play professional basketball. 8 teams in the NBA and 8 teams in the Eastern Basketball League. We played teams like Allentown and Wilkesboro, Scranton, Williamsport, Hazleton, Baltimore, Sunbury, and we had good crowds. You know, that's before TV became dominant. So if you wanted to see something, you had to come out and see it.
You play 3 nights a week. You play Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And if you got, you know, pay $100 a night, that's $300 extra a week.
Some of the greatest players in the world were in the Eastern League playing on the weekends.
You're talking about Hal Lear, you're talking about Wally Choice, Jack McCluskey, Jack Ramsey, John Chaney.
John Chaney, he was a great player. Oh man, this guy was some guy.
John Chaney was a ball handler extraordinaire.
Tremendous shooter.
He was a rebounder.
He was a ferocious defender.
A very, very tough, tenacious, physical defensive player. He wanted to play the players on the other team that were the good players offensively.
He was a guy who would guard you to the point of death. Teeth in my stomach, and I just wouldn't let you beat me. Just wouldn't.
John Chaney should have gotten a chance to play in the NBA.
He would have been in the pros easily, but they weren't ready for too many of us in those days.
I just wanted to play.
And Stan Novak, who was coaching up in the Eastern Professional Basketball League, came to my house and told my family that they wanted me to come to Eastern Pro League where I could come back, teach in the days, in the weekdays, and then play basketball on the weekends, earn money. I said, well, yeah, I'm coming back home to the state of Pennsylvania. I was raised and born in Jacksonville, Florida. It was an area called Black Bottom. Whenever it rained for any great length of time, water would come up right onto the porch and right into the living room area, into the shared kitchen area. And I can remember my mom many times sitting in water, baking a cake, and a frog in the kitchen, you know, jumping around and hopping around. And we'd be jumping at the frog. This was just a way of life that we'd gotten used to.
But when he was 14, John Chaney and his family moved north.
We knew we were coming to the north, so we thought the north was snowing. We thought it was going to be cold here. Halfway here, my aunt and my mother, all right, go in the bathroom, put on your long drawers. When we got in 30th Street Station in Philadelphia, in July, you talking about hot. We were sweating. When we got out that cab down in South Philly, everybody in the block was looking at us, and they just knew they had one. They had a sucker, believe me, because we just looked like, look at all the tall buildings.
Chaney's competitive drive paid off. In 1951, he was named Philadelphia's High School Player of the Year.
Yet here I am playing basketball in a city where a great deal of the players were white. Tom Gola, my dear friend Tommy, he was the most valuable player in the Catholic League. Here he is, he's going on to LaSalle. Here I am, there wasn't a scholarship offered to me in this city. Eventually, Big House Gaines from Winston-Salem was interested in me, but another historic black school came in, put me on a train one day before Big House got here, and took me to Bethune-Cookman College in Daytona Beach.
Oh, he put up big numbers up there. And when Bethune came to town, I mean, it'd be sellout crowd. They'd come to see him.
They used to say JC for Jesus Christ. He was that kind of basketball player.
He played, now he ain't passing the ball to nobody.
I'd go through there and score 37, 43, 32. But it was just like zip, zap. It was done and it was over and nobody remembers it.
After graduating from Bethune-Cookman in 1955, Chaney starred in the Eastern League, but he never played in the NBA.
You mean to tell me you didn't see that I was the best player in the city? You wouldn't keep watching me as I went on to college and to see what I accomplished in the Eastern League? Something was wrong there, and it simply meant that they were deliberately keeping away from black players. They just did it.
As you know, the Supreme Court of the United States has decided that separate public educational facilities for the races are inherently unequal, and therefore compulsory school segregation laws are unconstitutional. Our personal opinions about the decision have no bearing on the matter of enforcement.
In 1954, the country started to change, however reluctantly. Separate was no longer equal, and the new Supreme Court ruling affected the basketball world as well. While many educational institutions resisted this change, others quickly recognized the financial benefits. Increasingly, predominantly white universities began recruiting black ball players, including 4 who were destined to be superstars.
Guys from D.C. said, we got a player in D.C., his name is Elgin Baylor. Guys from Indiana, they said, well, we got a player in Indiana, his name is Oscar Robertson. So I said, well, good. I said, well, I'm from Philadelphia. got a guy in Philadelphia, his name is Wilt Chamberlain. He's going to change the game.
I've been coaching him for 2 years now, and I marvel at just watching him play. His ability to block shots and to get about 2 feet over the basket is a wonderful asset for having him there.
I see what you mean.
Well, Bill Russell was the best. When I first played basketball, my idol in the game became Bill Russell. Bill Russell was left-handed. Bill Russell was born in Monroe and lived in Monroe till he was 12 years old. So I mean, I had a perfect guy for an idol, you know.
Ironically, as predominantly white institutions desegregated their basketball teams, the programs at black colleges suffered the consequences.
When the white schools integrated, they didn't do it out of the goodness of their hearts. It was an economic thing. And when they started recruiting the black athletes, it started having an effect on the black college athletic programs because they would take the best athletes.
They were after our kids and they were getting them.
Bill Russell went to the University of San Francisco. Elgin Baylor went to Seattle University. Oscar Robertson attended University of Cincinnati. And Wilt Chamberlain went to Kansas. 4 black superstars at predominantly white universities.
And next, the big fella, Wilt Chamberlain, Center, University of Kansas.
Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell were playing on television.
Howdy, Wilt.
Here, everything was light and they were powerful and they were sure and certain. By contrast, all around me, things were dark in all manner of ways and so uncertain. It created a sense in me of a need to find a better life somewhere and try to find that life that Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain were having.
In the meantime, 2 stars from historically black colleges, Woody Salisbury and Earl Lloyd, had made their starting teams in the NBA.
I was Rookie of the Year in 1957-58 season.
Woody Salisbury was a great player. A lot of agility, good speed, good hands. Woody was, 6'8", 6'9", about 240, and could score.
Woody Salisbury makes good this time with the jump.
But how I made it, I think mostly defense. That's the only way I got to play when I got to Philly.
The Hawks hadn't scored a basket in almost 6 minutes.
I didn't know I could play defense until I come in the NBA.
Black players coming into the NBA were never able to really show their full talent. They were really role players. So Earl Lloyd ended up being a defensive player for the Syracuse Nationals, a rebounder, and a guy that set screens, and somewhat of a tough guy for them. But never a situation where they were integrated into the offense.
Earl Lloyd was never really accepted on or off the court, despite being a starter on an NBA championship team in 1955. But in some cases, that would change. The great skills of Sam Jones, one of John McClendon's star guards at North Carolina College, were being recognized by his Boston Celtics teammates. And nobody, including Red Auerbach, wanted him to change his style.
Sam Jones was ahead of his time. I knew Sam when he was in high school. His basketball skills then were superior to what you see from most guys now.
Now that's the guy, my goodness, you talking about shooter. He wouldn't pass the ball. He'll shoot you in a game and out of it.
Sam Jones shooting and connecting. Sam Jones shows why he's the Celtics' top point producer.
Bill Russell said, Sam Jones is the #1 clutch shooter in the history of NBA basketball.
Sam shooting, it's good.
When Red Auerbach called timeout, he said the last shot was for Sam Jones.
With the final whistle, Sam Jones has the ball, and he lets it go with a whoop.
By the late 1950s, more and more black players and coaches were having an effect on the game. John McClendon had been lured to Tennessee A&I by its president, Walter Davis.
His plan was to use athletics to put that university on the national map. And he knew about Coach McClendon. He recruited him very, very aggressively and told Coach McClendon, if you want to make your mark on a national scale, you need to come to my institution. And it was seductive. Coach McClendon went. The molding of the Tennessee A&I Tigers was very well organized and orchestrated by Coach McClendon. He recruited players to fit into a system.
And in 1955, one of his first recruits was schoolboy legend Dick Barnett.
I call Mike London a iron fist and a velvet glove. Never really raised his voice, never cursed, never used intimidating statements to players. He cared about you not just as an athlete, but as a productive citizen that's going to go out and make your way in the world.
Dick Barnett's Coach Mike London's special project from Gary, Indiana. He's one of those guys now, 2 or 3 slept in one bed. Coach Mike London loved him.
My father was a laborer. We lived in a segregated society. Roosevelt was an all-black school, and most other schools in Gary were white. He came to see my parents, and we'd love for your son to come to Tennessee State. I had of course, they had no reference to colleges except for what they might have seen on television or something like that. But fortunately, I saw a different world. And my aspiration was not to work in the steel mills of Gary.
You don't never need help.
Barnett firing, getting it in there. Barnett firing and getting it. Dick Barnett. Barnett, good.
Whatever you do.
Dick Barnett had a glorious high school career. I played against Oscar Robertson in the Indiana State Finals. Coach McClendon did have some concerns about Dick Barnett. Dick Barnett was, should we say, a free roller at the time.
I was seduced and intoxicated by sports, and really grades and academics really wasn't on my mind.
Dick Barnett was not a good student. He was really a functional illiterate. And they nurtured him through Tennessee State. The president of the school was very supportive of him.
It wasn't because he didn't have the brain power. He just wouldn't go to class. He skipped class and read books. They used to post the grades. You go there and you either had your name or the number, and Barnett had F. Flunked everything on his midterm grades. So the guys who were his friends, they kid him. They said, Dick, said, I'm carrying a 3.3. He said, what's your average, man? Dick said, he talked right slow. He said, well, my average is 30 points a game, baby. What's yours?
Dick Barnett was, to us, when he played at Tennessee State, was one of the greatest basketball players to ever play. And he really brought to organized sports in that black college setting a lot of the spirit of the playground. talking trash, get back, I can shoot over you, I'm in charge, I'm playing God, and that's not G-U-A-R-D, that's G-O-D.
Coach McClendon allowed Dick Barnett to have an individual style on the basketball court.
When he brought him to Tennessee State, people told him I need to change his style and all that. Coach McClendon said, you all got to be crazy.
Dick Barnett, of course, had this uncanny shot, which he called fall back, baby.
He would fade into the corner when he shot and shoot a long arching jump shot and kick his legs. So everybody wanted to act like Dick Barnett. And so on the playgrounds, in the corners where they have the fences, all of the fences were torn down partly in the corners in all the playgrounds in North Nashville because everybody was trying to fade into the corner like Dick Barnett.
Our games at Tennessee State would be sold out. In those audiences might be any number of whites. They would come and go and watch the games because Barnett averaged 30, 33 points a game. The team was scoring 90-some points a game. That's unlike anybody around had ever done. And so people came to see the show. Integrated audience on one hand, people side by side, stepping on each other's toes, and no telling what, no problem. Off campus, it's a different atmosphere.
Nashville was really the hotbed which the civil rights movement really came of age because of the students who were willing to put their feet to the pavement and their lives on the line in some respects. I think was a place that was more open to progressive change than many other southern cities. And I think Coach McClendon understood that.
I was part of going downtown, trying to desegregate lunch counters in Nashville. We were called niggers and everything else. So we were not in isolation. We were part of what was going on.
We practiced, one guy would play the redneck cop, one guy would play a Klansman and then call you nigger and then slap you, and you're supposed to take it and smile. But it's nothing like being on the front line and having it actually happen to you.
You had to decide whether or not you're going to allow somebody to pour coffee all over your suit, all over you. By just your presence, people were willing to hit you in the head or whatever it was. You knew that was coming. If you could not do that, then what they would do is say, well, you take another role.
We are here in the magnificent $6 million Municipal Auditorium of Kansas City, Missouri tonight with the most coveted of all titles at stake, this NAIA National Championship.
People moving out, people moving in, why? Because of the color of the skin. Run, 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 but you sure can't hide. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Vote for me and I'll set you free. Rap on, brother, rap on. Well, segregation, determination, demonstration, integration, aggravation, humiliation, obligation to our nation. All the children.
With all the residue of racism that we had to face during that particular time, we were the first team to ever win 3 consecutive national championships in that era, which was unheard of.
Coach Johnny McClendon, your East Tennessee State national champion, NAIA presents the James Naismith Trophy, which is symbolic of our championship for this year. Congratulations to you, your school, and team.
We were the only black team there. And to be able to accomplish that, I think, was a great accomplishment.
The 3 straight national championships won by McClendon is the first time that any school had won 3 straight national championships.
Tennessee State and McClendon endeared himself to the African American community as a result of winning the national championships. The example that many of the others were to try to follow to have that kind of success.
And here he was finally able to go on the national scene with his teams and let the public know what these teams can do, how good they are. They're not just black players from a little black college.
When UCLA won 3 consecutive NCAA champions, it was big news. When we did it, most people don't even know about it. We felt we were a pretty good team. In fact, we felt that we could have won the NCAA if we would have been allowed into the NCAA.
During the same time that Dick Barnett was setting new records at Tennessee A&I, arguably the greatest player to come out of historically black colleges was playing for Winston-Salem State Teachers College. Cleo Hill learned the game in Newark, New Jersey, where he earned the nickname Skywalker. Al the Destroyer Addles played against Hill in high school.
He and I, we were always very friendly competitors, but competitors nonetheless. He was the best high school player I had played against.
At Southside, they didn't encourage us to go to college. And then we started hearing about these historically black colleges in the South. We started hearing about fellows from our community who were getting a chance to go to college.
Cleo was recruited by Winston-Salem coach Clarence Gaines, but that was no guarantee that he would make the team.
Mr. Gaines said, if I bring you in here and give you a scholarship, you're supposed to know how to play. I went right to the gym, and I had an unbelievable practice there with his upperclassmen. I mean, shooting hook shots. I mean, boy, it was coming out so perfectly. It was like music.
Cleo Hill was probably the greatest player of his time, black or white.
What is it? Tell me if you think you know. What is it? If you really hear the past and the years will show you in a hip trip.
He had every imaginable shot with both hands.
Shoot jump shot.
Left hand hook shot.
He could shoot the set shot.
Right hand hook shot.
One of the early guys to play above the rim.
Couldn't guard him on his left because he was shooting right. If you guard him on his right, he would shoot left hand.
Shoot a hook shot from half court.
People you just didn't believe it.
In the early 50s, a black player who went to a black school couldn't dream of being in the NBA because they only had 8 or 9 teams, and the black players that they took were from big-time schools. So I wasn't dreaming, I was hoping, but I didn't think I would ever be drafted until Al Addles was drafted in the 4th round by the Philadelphia Warriors of the National Basketball Association, and I figured maybe I might get a chance too.
And he did. He was drafted by the St. Louis Hawks in 1961 in the 1st round.
I went out there about 5:30 and the paper was there, and I saw the picture and it said #1 draft choice by the Hawks. And I had to go tell Mr. Jarvis, I was a store owner. I said, I took one of your papers, I came to pay. He said, I figured it was you. I knew it was coming up. So that changed things.
He was a fabulous basketball player at Winston-Salem. He was coached by one of the great coaches of all time, Coach Gaines. But wrong place, St. Louis, wrong time because the black players were just beginning to start coming into the league with more numbers.
We played an exhibition game in Lexington, Kentucky against the Celtics. About 2 in the afternoon, Bill Russell, Sam Jones came to the room with me and Woody Salisbury in it. And they said they weren't playing. We said, why?
Sam Jones and Sat Sanders go down to the coffee shop to eat. Russell and I up in the room talking. They called up and said they wouldn't serve them.
So right away, I went down to see whether that was true because I wasn't going to sit out unless it's true. And I went down and they said, no, we can't serve you. So they didn't play, we didn't play.
Boston's owner come out and make a public apology to his team. Said this would never happen again. When you get back to St. Louis, they say we should be fined and suspended. We embarrassed Hagan.
Cliff Hagan said he was embarrassed, and Ben Kernestone and the Hawks said nothing. In about 3 weeks, boom, trade. Woody Salisbury's gone, Cy Green's gone, and I was the only black player left. And I think the only reason I was left is Coach Seymour was still there.
Well, Cleo went into a hornet's nest in St. Louis. It was a Southern basketball franchise. They really didn't want black players. They drafted him. He came in with all this big hullabaloo about him. But the players on the team decided that they didn't want to play with him.
When he went to the St. Louis Hawks, he was so good that Hagan, LaVellette just hated him.
After the first game, I scored 26. So when I came, that meant the averages of 27 by Bob Pettit, 23 by Cliff Hagan, 21 by Clyde LaVellette. Those averages all broke down because of my scoring ability.
Those kind of guys, they weren't going to give up the ball so this black player could come in and shine. They froze him out.
I did tell Coach, I said, I don't think they want me to shoot. He said, if you don't shoot, you're sitting down.
He was scoring too many points, and Bob Pettit and Cliff Hagan, they went to the general manager and said, hey, this guy shoots too much. The front office told him, said you got to get rid of him. And Paul Seymour said, no, I'm not going to do that. So they said, well, then you got to go.
After they fired Coach Seymour, he told me that he could have kept his job had he benched me. But he said if he benched me, he would have to look at himself in the mirror, and he didn't want to do that.
St. Louis was a bastion of segregation at that time. And the coach stood by him because he knew that with Cleo, there were no barriers in how far that they could go.
Well, you don't take a great offensive player and now all of a sudden you turn his head away from the basket and you now make him a distributor as opposed to a guy that can use his offensive skills. And that didn't work.
Cleo looked like they had messed him up so much. He looked like he didn't know how to play basketball. He would get the ball and hesitating where, you know, he used to make it move.
Well, I think after that, Cleo was sort of devastated.
And the next year, we got a new coach, Harry Gallatin. When practice was over, I was heading to the dressing room. He said, hey, Cleo, come here, I want to talk to you. I came over, he said, Cleo, what kind of teacher are you? I said, I think I'm pretty good because I went to Winston-Salem Teachers College. He said, well, we're going to let you teach. That's how I got it. That's how I got it.
And then the owner of the Hawks got together with the other owners, and the next thing you know, this guy's blackballed from the league.
And at that time, being blacklisted meant you were dead as an NBA player.
After he got fired, Coach Seymour said, don't worry, I know at least 2 teams that want you. And he hadn't called back in 2 weeks. Then he finally called. He said, I'm sorry, I just didn't know Mr. Kerner was that powerful. That's all he said.
One of the best ever. Ever one of the best. But he never played again.
The torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans, proud of our ancient heritage and unwilling to witness or permit the slow undoing of those human rights
In 1960, a protest called the Sit-In was created by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. The sit-in amounted to a peaceful attempt to desegregate, with an emphasis on nonviolence.
Negroes in Greensboro, North Carolina descended on a segregated drive-in and demanded to be served. They said they would sit there until they were. The sit-in demonstrators were arrested, but the idea had caught on.
We still have the attitude of love. We still have the method of passive resistance, and we are still insisting emphatically that violence is self-defeating.
We never had anyone talking about passive resistance now. It's a whole new world there. And no one thought anything like that would work. We thought the only way any kind of change would come would be through armed resistance. But when Dr. King came, he's talking about a whole new ball game. It worked for Gandhi, but we didn't think it worked for us. But now here comes a man and started talking about turn the other cheek. That's pretty heavy.
The sit-in quickly spread from Greensboro to more than 50 cities in 9 states. Some black athletes had difficulty accepting the new strategy.
I admired them because I couldn't do it. I mean, somebody hit me, I hit them back. You know, I mean, that's just the way I am. I mean, I know that I'm, you know, I admire Martin Luther King. Said nonviolence, I'm not a nonviolent person.
I will hit back after I get hit, or if somebody spits on me, I'm going to, you know, do what I have to do, even if I get killed doing it. You know, you have to understand the athletic mentality. We had meetings on campus, and they didn't want the athletes fighting and carrying on like that. And they would actually tell the guys that, you know, if you can't go down and do it this way, we don't want you down there.
Coach Hodney would say, you know, guys, you don't need to go out there and stand in marching lines. I mean, what you do, how you represent Grambling as an athlete will mean more, because this is what you can do.
Well, the athletes were told by the coaches that sports was above politics. And the coaches knew that that was a lie.
By 1959, John McClendon had exceeded all expectations, except possibly his own, by leading Tennessee A&I to 3 consecutive national championships. Forever ambitious, he sought further opportunity. He was offered a chance to coach in Cleveland, a professional team with a mediocre record called the Pipers. He immediately stocked the team with his former college players.
He brought John Barnhill with him. Ben Warley came a year later, Ron Hamilton, and the prize, of course, was Dick Barnett.
And with that, John B. McClendon became the first African-American to coach an integrated professional basketball team. In his second season, McClendon led them to the championship.
After the regular season, they played the United States Olympic team. They were one of the best Olympic teams we ever had. They had incredible players. Jerry West played for that team, Oscar Robertson, Walt Bellamy. But McClendon's team was in wonderful shape, as all his teams were, and they simply ran him off the court at the end.
In 1960, the Pipers entered the new American Basketball League, designed to compete with the NBA. They were sold to a group headed by Cleveland's born and bred George Steinbrenner.
John McClendon and George Steinbrenner are about as different as any two could get.
Yes, working for Steinbrenner, I'm sure even. then, and perhaps to today, isn't the easiest thing in the world.
He yelled at the players. He yelled at Coach McClendon during the game. He would yell at the referees continuously.
He was a driven man. He wanted to succeed by any means possible.
Steinbrenner did call Coach McClendon a black boy one time, but he did not believe that George Steinbrenner was a racist. George Steinbrenner treated everybody shabbily.
After winning the title, Steinbrenner started to meddle. During a game against the Hawaiian Chiefs, things got out of hand.
Steinbrenner made a deal with the coach of the Hawaiian team that he would trade Grady McCollum literally in the middle of a game.
Steinbrenner traded this player at halftime and wanted him to go and suit up for the other team.
John McClendon was aghast. He said he was so surprised he could not even speak for a moment or two. And Grady McCollum was crying at the time. Because of Steinbrenner's antics, McClendon's team went into a mild losing streak, and Steinbrenner decided not to pay the players. They weren't performing up to his expectations. Coach McClendon said, you have to pay the players. They are doing their best. We've had some injuries, etc. So out of that clash, McClendon resigned from the coaching the Pipers.
As captain of his Fisk University team, Ben Job's quickness and leadership became evident to all observers.
Job always carried himself in a way that there was no doubt that he knew what he wanted to do. And he was always neat, clean, proud, even to the point that he had us believing that we were that way too. He could shoot, could pass, a student of the game. He was a little weasel, but he'd fight in a minute.
He's a feisty fellow, even when he was a little young guy. I knew him when he was in the 9th grade. Nothing was ever good enough. He just had to practice it, practice it, practice it, and he would ask you 1,001 questions.
But you would never have known that he was from an impoverished background. You would never know that the relative that he stayed with was known as a junk man in the community, a Fred Sanford of the world.
Job, son of a Tennessee sharecropper, became the first of his 15 siblings to attend college.
My father never went to school a day in his life. He never learned to read. He never learned to write. He did not see the significance of education. They never set foot on Fisk University campus. They really didn't even know where it was. They just knew it was on the other side of town. So it had no value to them at all. My parents were workaholics. That was what they thought their children should do, should work. If someone would say to my parents, say, well, Ben's playing ball. Playing, so what? But if they say, well, Ben is working down at the Coca-Cola plant, now working, now they might want to come see that.
In 1959, Job became the coach at Cameron High School in Nashville.
He was the most intense coach you ever wanted to see.
I didn't know how to lose. And we lost in the state finals, and I said, that's it. I couldn't take it.
He tried selling insurance.
President of the insurance company called me in, and he said, your mom and dad have insurance? I said, no, sir. He said, anyone in your family ever had insurance? I said, no, sir. He said, do you have insurance? I said, no, sir. He said, you don't really believe in insurance? I said, no, sir. He said, let me tell you something, son. He said, you cannot sell something that you don't believe in.
He joined a World Peace Organization and went to Africa, where he coached everything from cricket to basketball. When he returned to the U.S. in the autumn of 19...
Since